Hello, my name is Rafi Ahmad, and today I'll be talking about the best processors for servers and for mobile phones. I am representing the company GlipGlop. Uh, the reason is because GlipGlop has been having a higher customer base recently, and we need newer servers to maintain all the information. Aside from that, the Glip 4 is being built and requires a well-made CPU. This is requested by the GlipGlop executives. So here's a little bit of background. Apple and Samsung have announced their newest production on flagship phones. Apple is using their brand new M1 processor, and rumors have it it's a really, really well-made processor. And Samsung is using the Qualcomm Snapdragon processor. In the previous year, the GlipGlop has developed the Glip 3, and that phone has outsold Samsung and Apple's phones. Therefore, expectations are very high for the Glip 4. In order to meet these expectations, we had to implement the best and newest features, and we have to have the better operating system. In order for us to have new features and a really well-made operating system, we have to have a good we have to have a good processor. And this is where a partnership with ARM comes in. ARM is a well-known company. They develop the top-notch, top-of-the-line processors. In order to compete with Apple and Samsung, right, we had decided to partner with them, with ARM, uh, to get their best processor and to implement it in our device, the Clip 4. Aside from that, we have been having an overwhelming amount of customers in the past couple of months, and based off our research, the growth will continue for the following years. Because of this, we need to have newer servers to hold in all the information. So here's a little bit of a theoretical question. Let's say you have a family of four, right? And you're looking to buy a new vehicle. Now, which vehicle would you purchase? The one on the left that can only fit like one or two people, or the vehicle on the right, which can fit multiple people? Obviously, you would choose the one on the right, right? Because you need space to fit all these people in, and as well as that, you have a family, so you might have some outdoor equipment you want to take with you, and you need a big trunk, etc., right? And the reason I mention this is because we'll be talking about a RISC architecture versus a CISC architecture. Now, what does this mean? Well, every processor is either a RISC architecture or CISC architecture. And you could think of a RISC architecture as a processor that can handle multiple instructions or multiple cycles at once. And a CISC architecture can only handle one cycle at once. So let's say, for example, right? Oh, sorry about that. Let's say, for example, right, that you are doing the laundry. Well, let's say you had 10 washing machines and 10 dryers and 10 people to fold your laundry for you. Well, you could be doing 10 loads of laundry at a time versus if you only had one laundry, one dryer, and yourself. Well, that would be a CISC architecture where you can only do one cycle of laundry at a time. Versus if you had the 10 people, the 10 washing machines, the 10 dryers, you would be able to do 10 cycles at a time. So a RISC architecture is like having 10 washing machines and being able to do 10 cycles of laundries at once versus a CISC architecture, which can only handle one cycle at a time. Now, if you're still confused, right? Once again, a RISC architecture can handle multiple cycles at once. It can handle multiple instructions, and it's a bit more complex, versus a CISC architecture can only do one cycle at a time. Now, you might be wondering, why do we even have a CISC architecture when RISC is obviously better? Well, you see, a RISC architecture requires a lot of power. On top of that, a RISC architecture produces a lot of heat, like a lot of heat. So if you had a phone that was a RISC architecture, that had a RISC architecture processor, well, your phone would probably die within 5 minutes because there's a lot of power being used. There's a lot of electricity being consumed in order to handle all that uh, processing. Versus a CISC architecture, well, it's mostly hardware dependent. It's not very software dependent. So a CISC architecture requires less battery and it produces very, very little heat. So for a flagship phone that's being made, right, you'd obviously want to go, or not just a flagship phone, for any mobile device, you'd obviously want to go with a CISC architecture because we have a limited amount of power, we have a battery, and on top of that, we do not have a big fan that can just spit out heat. Uh, Now, when we are talking about servers or computers, we'd obviously want to go for RISC architecture because we want the faster processing time. We want a processor that can handle multiple instructions at a time. And on top of that, we are not constrained on having power. We are plugged into a wall 24/7, so we are good to go. Aside from that, right, we also have fans on our computers which can help cool down our CPU or our processor. All right, so let's talk about some requirements we are going to have if we're going to be talking about servers specifically. Um, like I mentioned before, a RISC architecture CPU requires a very cold environment. It requires air conditioning because these things are going to be running 24/7. And if a computer is running 24/7 in an enclosed area, it's going to be producing a lot of heat. So we have to have air conditioning. We also have to have reliable heat sinks, which are CPU coolers, and that will help keep the CPUs cold. Every month we need to maintain the servers, like we need to go in there and clean out any dust, and we also have enough power to maintain the servers and the air conditioning as well. Here are our three options for server CPUs, specifically RISC architecture CPUs, right? We have the Intel Xeon W1290Te. The Intel Xeon is a very well-known processor. It is designed specifically for server usage. It is clocked at 4.50 gigahertz of DDR4 memory. The CPU is locked to prevent any overclocking. The reason being is because the people who develop, or Intel, who has developed this processor, they do not want people messing around and overclocking it because the CPU is already at its max by default setting or factory setting. It's already at its max specs. Although overclocking is very unnecessary for server-side work, right? So it doesn't really matter too much. Aside from that, it also has UHD graphics, which is also once again unnecessary for server-side works, but this processor is more than capable to do workloads of data for multiple cloud services such as AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. Now, on the right, we have the AMD EPYC 7742. The AMD EPYC 7742 is one of the, or has one of the best server benchmarks of all time. It has 64 cores, 128 threads, and 256 megabytes of L3 cache. Um, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention how many cores the Intel CPU has. The Intel CPU only has 10 cores and 23 threads, and the AMD EPYC 7742 has 64 cores, 128 threads, and 256 megabytes of L3 cache. Its base clock is 2.25 gigahertz, and you can boost it all the way up to 3.5 gigahertz. Its maximum core temperature is 76 degrees Celsius, and this processor is well more than capable to handle workloads from AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. In fact, it was actually designed specifically for server-side work. Now, the AMD EPYC 7642 is the one all the way on the right. And this processor is not as powerful as 7742. For example, it only has 48 cores, 96 threads, and it has the same amount of L3 cache as the 7742. However, don't get me wrong, this processor is more than capable of doing all the work a 7742 can do. Um, it's just not as powerful. All three processors are very, very good options. However, if we were to have a lot of customers, if we were to have an overwhelming amount of data, the two processors on the right would be capable of handling all that workload, versus the Intel Xeon would not be able to handle all that output. You could think of the Intel Xeon would be perfect for a small owned business versus these two processors on the right, the AMD processors, are actually made for top 500 Fortune companies who have to handle lots and lots of server output or data. Amazon actually uses the AMD EPYC 7742 for their processors. And last but not least, we also have the ARM Cortex A78. The ARM Cortex A78 is the top-notch ARM processor. It has uh, new AI and machine learning um, processes implemented within the processor itself. Um, This processor can help develop new features for the Glip 4. So we have some comparisons. We have cost, performance, and reliability. When it comes to cost, the Intel Xeon is the cheapest processor. In fact, the Xeon is only $494. Now, the 7742 is $6,950, which is the most expensive CPU. Um, the 7642 is 4,775. When it comes to performance, obviously the 7742 will be the fastest one. It is 76% faster than the Intel Xeon processor, and it is 25% faster than the 7642. When it comes to reliability, the Intel Xeon easily beats the other AMD processors because it takes less power, and since it takes less power, it produces less heat, and since it produces less heat, um, it has less dust being developed on it, and on top of that, it costs less to maintain than the other two AMD processors. However, the other two AMD processors require a lot more power, uh, which obviously once again develops a lot more heat. So when it comes to reliability, the Intel Xeon is the best option. Uh, then the 7642 would be the second best option, and then the third best option would be the 7742. When it comes to performance, the 7742 takes the lead, then the 7642, then the Intel Xeon. When it comes to cost, the Intel Xeon is the cheapest, then the AMD 7642, and then the 7742 would be the most expensive. My recommendation would be that the AMD 7642 would be the best processor for all the servers, uh, and the ARM Cortex A786 processor would be the processor we use for a new mobile phone. Although the 7742 is a powerful processor, it is a bit overkill for the work we have. The 7642 can do just as much as the 7742. However, it is cheaper. It also uses less power. So yeah, thank you for watching my presentation, and yeah, have a good day.